to me, this is such a perfect representation of how deep the programming goes, where like, okay, if you don't want to participate in the solutions, this quote solutions the system gives you, then you don't want to do anything. The only way to do quote something is to participate in the system. Whereas like, well, forgive me, but if the system has created all these problems, perhaps there are solutions outside of it that might work to disempower it at the same time empowering people. Because like, who can argue right now on any side, regardless of your partisan persuasions, like who can argue that the system is empowering people and that it's serving people? Who even argues that aside from like Joe Biden and his administration, you know?
You're listening to the Art and War podcast with your hosts Nathan, BR, and Paige. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience. BR is a British anarchist that moved to the States, and Paige is a lifelong artist based in Washington. All three are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the Seaburn Art page. Enjoy the show.
All right, hello and welcome to the Art and War podcast. I'm BR on my lonesome today and joined by a very special guest, good friend of mine, Miss Carey Wedler.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So good to hear your voice again. Like I was just saying, been a while since all of us heard your voice. Really, you've been off busy and doing your own thing, which is awesome. But for anyone who's not familiar with Carey Wedler, for one, you did the intro for this show for like the first 100 episodes or so.
Oh, I did. I did my
yep.
my yoga teacher voice.
Yeah, so I'm sure for a long time people were like, who does your introductions? It's like, oh, Carey Wedler. And it was like a real 50-50 of like people who were like in the know and people were like, who's that?
Yeah, right. And it's funny because that is not my normal tone in my videos. Like yoga teacher Carey is very different from anarchist video content creator Carey. So I have to slow it down and smooth it out. And it's almost unrecognizable if you have only seen my videos.
It's so funny because like I was just telling you, this show has such an interesting intersection of people who listen. So, you know, it's primarily like a gun culture, gun community kind of thing, but there is a big liberty element to that. And so then you get all of this interesting overlap, which is why I'm in the mix, being like kind of myself a bridge between the guns and anarchism kind of and liberty space. And so this show, like, You've been drip fed here and there. You've been mentioned. You're in the intro and stuff, and obviously you're friendly with myself, Mitch, Nathan, and a lot of other people who kind of tiptoe into this gun space, being that Liberty has connections. But I really wanted to bring someone on who had like a really strong message and who kind of embodied what I mean when I say anarchism, because a lot of people probably hear that who are less familiar with that side of culture and of the liberty kind of movement. They might hear anarchism and be like, oh my god, you mean, you know, the people burning down police stations and, you know, like Black Bloc, Antifa and all that kind of thing, and might not necessarily get what we mean. So all that to say, Carey Wedler, great liberty content creator for anyone who's not familiar. How long have you been doing this? Since the Ron Paul days, right?
I don't want to say it gives away how old I am. No, I started I made my first video for Ron Paul in 2011, and I got more serious about making videos in 2014. But I'm off and on. I don't think I'm ever going to be one of those creators that's making videos like every day. It's just not. As I mentioned, I'm a yoga instructor. I don't actively teach, but like I do prioritize my self-care. But don't let that trick you into thinking I'm just like a little liberal hippie from California. I like guns. I'm not a pacifist. All these things can coexist, and maybe we can talk about that. But yeah, it's been quite a long time. I've been around long enough to recognize the ebbs and flows of current events and government and overreach. And it's, we were talking about before we started recording, like the way the news has been going. I log on to Twitter, or I'm on Instagram, and I see all these news stories, and I'm like, oh, okay, so it's the same thing. And I know that it appears like it's new stuff to people who are, you know, looking at the surface level or following the news cycle. But the more I pay attention to the news cycle, the longer it goes on. And I also studied history. Like the more it's the same. It's the same thing over and over, and it can get more outrageous. It can be even more egregious than we ever thought, because every time it's like, oh God, how could it get any worse? And then it gets worse.
Yeah. Oh, the
But
next thing arrived. What is it?
right. Right, but it's the same patterns, and a lot. That's the reason that really I turned toward anarchism. So if you want to get into that, we can. I don't know
Oh
if you
yeah.
want me to give my background. Start with Ron Paul.
I mean, maybe a little on Ron Paul. I mean, people love to hear it, but before we go
Yeah.
any further, I have to tell everyone, do not be fooled by the Valley Girl accent. This is the most based Valley Girl you will ever find. So, um, but yeah, so I mean, you're not like a little liberal now, but someone was once upon a time an Obama voter, right?
Yeah, so like let me give you the history of like how I found Ron Paul. That I won't do it again. That's my Valley Girl voice. But so
Everyone's like, wait, was she talking like that the whole time?
I know, turn it off. No, so I am from California. I'm from Los Angeles, born and raised, which, as many of you know, that's quite a liberal environment. And so that's really what I was steeped in growing up. I was very much like a proud progressive who was positive I was on the right side of history because I supported Barack Obama, and he was a perfect blend of JFK and Abraham Lincoln, and he was going to change the country, and all I had to do was vote for him, and I did my part. So that's where I was. And it was after college. I was actually interning at a film studio. It was a really cool film studio. Everybody hates Hollywood, and for very good reason, but this is a more independent studio that makes some really good content. And I was a script reader, and I would finish my script. So I was just kind of like sitting around twiddling my thumbs at this film studio. So I was like, like maybe I should see what's happening in the news. Sorry, I did the Valley Girl again. That's how I do stupid. So as soon as I started actually seeing what Barack Obama was doing as president and how he had broken all of his promises, I was obviously not very happy. At the time, it was like, I mean, we were looking at his collusion with the financial industry and his drone wars, and just it was like one thing after the other. And even though I was like a really mindless statist at the time, I still had principles. They might not have been consistent principles because I supported big government and I hated violence. So you can't have both at the same time in harmony. But I was very upset, and it was around that time that a friend introduced me to the good doctor, Ron Paul. And it was like it lit me on fire. Like hearing the way that he spoke truth to power so fearlessly, like sitting or standing on the debate stage. I think it was with Rudy Giuliani, and they have that interaction about the war on terror and 9/11. And Ron Paul is talking about foreign policy and how all of this big government foreign adventurism had created resentment. And he never, as far as I am aware, he never actually blamed American people for this happening. He blamed the government. He blamed American foreign policy. And Rudy Giuliani is on stage like, oh, Ron Paul needs to take that back. That's not okay. And Ron Paul's just like, no, I'm not going to take it back. Yeah, like, yeah, right. And it just felt so invigorating to see someone like I was feeling hopeless after really believing in Barack Obama and really thinking that he was going to save the country and embody all these really peaceful ideals. And there was a period of feeling so cynical and so disappointed and so like, oh, this is never going to work. And then Ron Paul came in, and I mean, it was short-lived. I mean, I'll always love Ron Paul, but the campaign and the election cycle was short-lived because actually this was a big part of why I turned toward anarchism. Is I remember watching the debates in 2012 and just how they didn't give him enough time. I remember watching, I think it was Maine, there was a recount, I want to say, it was either a primary or a caucus. And I remember I was at Ron Paul headquarters in Venice, in California, and we were all sitting around just like, what is happening? Like he is not being given a fair try. And it started to really make me question the legitimacy of the system itself, because I started to realize like, oh, anyone who poses any threat at all to the established order is going to be kicked out. They're going to be smeared. They're not going to be given any attention. And at the time we were calling it like the Ron Paul blackout. It was a media blackout. Like they would not give him fair coverage. And of course I was still out on the street on election day in 2012 holding a sign like vote Ron Paul. Like I was still so hopeful. And after that, it really turned into an evolution for me, because I just lost faith in the electoral system. And then I actually started to get more into the philosophy of anarchism. I read Rothbard, Anatomy of the State, and that really clicked for me. Like, he has this line, and it's pretty out there. Like, it's offended a lot of people that I've sent Anatomy of the State to, but he talks about how we are not the government. And he uses the Jews in Nazi Germany as an example of that. He's like, if the Jews were the government, then they authorized their own extermination. Like, they were citizens of Germany, and yet somehow the government killed them. So no, we are actually not the government. And that and it seems like so basic. I know to you, I know to the circles that we're in, but it really is like, and it's easy to laugh at, but I believed it for sure. Like, I remember I'll get to that later. But I'm laughing to myself. I'm laughing at myself to myself privately in my head. I'll explain why. But it really, when we are taught from the youngest age, whether it's from our parents who went through the indoctrination system, or it's us going through the indoctrination system, by which I'm talking public schools, just the societal institutions, telling us constantly, like, your vote is your voice. We have representative government. If you don't like it, you can vote them out. Like, how could you believe anything else? And I know that there are people who, from the youngest ages, that were just like, no, this is bullshit. Yeah, right. This is all a lie. But I was not one of those people. I was very obedient. I was very, very invested in the system. And I believed that, like any good citizen, that my civic participation made democracy work. And I was laughing to myself because I remember this was, let's see, this would have been maybe like a year or two before I found Ron Paul. I remember having a conversation with my cousin, and she's not even American. I was over in Amsterdam with my Dutch cousin, and we were talking about the income tax. And she's like, there's like no real like authority for them to have an income tax. And I remember talking about the roads, and I thought I was making the best. I'm like, yeah, but who would build the roads? And I was like so proud of my argument. I'm like, I'm really through. Like, it was,
Destroyed.
And I think that and it's funny, like, and it not that long after did I start to see it a different way. And as far as I'm concerned, start to see the system the way it really works, which is we can dress it up in terms like representation and the republic and democracy, like pick your partisan flavor. But regardless, it's all underpinned by violence. Like, the institution of government does not function unless they are initiating violence or threatening violence to get compliance and to take your money to fund the programs, whatever the program may be, whether it's a leftist program or a right-wing program. I mean, right-wing, what does right-wing mean anymore? That, like, the term has been completely, it has no meaning because of the media.
Obliterated.
But right, but like the police force, for example, like, that's something that people on the more mainstream right love. They love to support it, and they kind of fail to see the disconnect between, like, look, okay, you hate the government, awesome, cool, we agree, but like, where does the government get its authority? Well, if the men with guns and the uniforms and the badges weren't enforcing their orders, like, they wouldn't have authority. And I don't want to construe this as like, oh, like, I hate police. I actually, like, I've come a long way in my evolution of how I perceive things. I believe they have no authority, but I don't have the energy to hate them. Like I will speak out against them. I will laugh in their faces at their presumption of having power over anyone. But like, I'm not like, I don't think it's helpful to like healing humanity's very long struggle against authority and division and authoritarianism. Like, I don't need to hate them to completely reject the notion that they have any kind of power whatsoever. So I don't want to come across of like, oh, fuck the police. Like, I mean, kind of, yeah, like, fuck the police as an institution, but like, not necessarily fuck the individual officers. But am I allowed to cuss? I've been really throwing around the F word. Do you need?
Carey,
is that cool?
This is on war. We have the filthiest of mouths. You are completely fine.
Okay, cool. It's just such a good word. Like, fuck the officers who are committing murder and abusing their power. And also to fuck the ones who fuck them all, but like, not fuck them all. Like, there's room for both. Like,
yeah. Like, we've talked about this before. We had Jared from Orion Training Group, who's worked on SWAT teams, and he has like differently radical opinions on kind of how policing should be restructured. Not all too different from where we're at to a degree, but yeah, like, there is individual responsibility. Like, there are awful people who have held the the role of being a police officer and have abused that power and done awful things with it that wouldn't exist if there wasn't that centralized power. And at the same time, there's plenty of people, just like the military, who signed up with the best intentions in their heart.
Right.
They were indoctrinated from birth to salute a flag and think that's a thing worth dying for, and that's gonna spice some people up. Where do I go softer? How do I go softer on that? Basically, a lot of us have been taken advantage of to serve things that enrich people who would not, risk themselves the same way for us. Politicians, big corporate bodies who enrich themselves from the prison industrial complex and from the military industrial complex and so on and so forth. A lot of people have been, tricked into sacrificing mind, body, and soul for others' profit. Be it, thinking with their best intentions, I'm protecting my community, I'm protecting my country, signing up to be an officer or a soldier or whatever. There's a lot of people who do it with the best of intentions. So I've said spicy things about cops before. I've thrown the ACAB line around and stuff. But yeah, with that kind of more mature, more healing attitude about, we're all human, we've all been, served a certain amount of brainwashing and indoctrination, and taken advantage of by people in ivory towers. There is that certain recognition, a lot of cops are kind of blue collar, even if they're putting the boot on other blue collar people's necks. Like, they're not in that much of a different spot. They've just been brainwashed to think they have this authority, and of course, not to talk in circles, some abuse it, some do their job with the best of intentions. But
Yeah, and I think the problem is that even when they're acting with good intentions, so many of these laws are so unjust and fly in the face of the values that these people signed up to protect, that
Mhm.
harm is still caused. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, well, they're just doing their jobs.
Yeah, no.
That's the foundation of so much violent authoritarianism throughout
Yes.
history. So for me, it's been kind of walking a middle path. And I also I don't want to live in a rage all the time.
Yes.
But at the same time, that's not to say that there aren't things to be enraged at. Like, when you look around at the world and what's happening, yeah, the healthy response is anger. Like, fuck this place, fuck these people. Like, that's all valid. But I think, as I have been working my way through not through the system, but through my own career and through my own content creation and the things I really care about, which are peace and freedom and respecting other people's rights as individuals, it no longer, this is going to sound like such a California yoga teacher thing to say, but it no longer serves me to be so reactive. And that doesn't mean that I'm walking around like Zen all the time. Oh, you should see me when I'm video editing and I am using coaching police brutality. I have a lot of feelings about it, but I think what
Yeah.
I'm getting at is I feel like this kind of reactivity, this hatred, this anger, if we're not present to it, if we don't serve as a container for it, it takes a driver's seat. And when that kind of reactivity is in the driver's seat, we get the kind of system we have right now. The
Yes.
system feeds off of our anger and our
Do
tendency to
something.
just yeah, exactly, do something.
This is
Fuck those
awful.
people.
Make a
Yeah.
law. There should be a law made about that. I'm outraged. Fix it now.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
giving you more power because I'm upset and it needs to happen now.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
cool.
I want to feel better, so I want you to do something for me, and you outsource your power and your responsibility to these people in positions of quote authority. I don't even want to act like it's a legitimate thing, because I don't believe it is. They are mortal human beings with the same level of ability as you as a human being. And I think that one of the biggest problems, and one of the reasons things have gotten so bad, is this really effective narrative and mentality that if we elect someone, well, they must know better than us. And they sell themselves as knowing better. They make all these promises. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to fix this for you. I'm going to make your life better. And it gets a little culty of you're outsourcing your power and your responsibility to yourself as an individual human being, as an individual soul. You're buying into somebody else's snake oil salesman. And again, I don't blame you for it. I can't judge people for that, because I was that way for a very long
Yep.
time. And I think it's never too late to break out of it. And it's, far be it from me to pass judgment on people who are still locked into the system and into the narratives. But that doesn't mean it's not important to break free of them and to change your mentality and really take responsibility for yourself on a much deeper level than is generally encouraged. Because at this point, it's like, be responsible, vote in the election, which is like, that's the opposite of taking responsibility. Because and something that, there's a really common retort when we talk about these things. People are like, oh, so you're not going to vote? So you suggest doing nothing? Like, it's just, to me, it's a reflection of, like, you don't want to do anything. You just want to let these problems go on. I'm like, literally the opposite. Like, to me, this is such a perfect representation of how deep the programming goes, where, like, okay, if you don't want to participate in the solutions, this quote solutions the system gives you, then you don't want to do anything. The only way to do quote something is to participate in the system. Whereas, like, well, forgive me, but if the system has created all these problems, perhaps there are solutions outside of it that might work to disempower it, at the same time empowering people. Because, like, who can argue right now on any side, regardless of your partisan persuasions, like, who can argue that the system is empowering people and that it's serving people? Who even argues that, aside from, like, Joe Biden and his administration,
100%. And people, there's always that line like, oh, if you don't vote, you can't complain. And it's like you said, when this system is the one manufacturing problems, and it has historically been proven to manufacture everything from wars to, all sorts of domestic issues like the crack epidemic and things like that. Like, the government is not, we don't, how can we expect them to solve the problems that they are literally manufacturing maliciously? Sometimes it's negligence, but a lot of the time it's actual maliciousness. So you beg them to take charge, to have more power over you. And it's things like, to talk in kind of our audience's main language in the world of gun rights, like, okay, we keep on voting and voting and voting, and gun rights are eroded more and more and more every single year. It's like, okay, what solves that? Well, let's look at the drug war. How was that effectively lost? They're still fighting it, but it's they drugs are winning. Drugs are kicking America's ass. Like, weed is legal all over the place. People love it. The culture wars won it.
Just one more cartel kingpin, and then we're gonna win. Like, okay, and then and another.
Of course.
Yeah, and to speak to that, like, the mentality of gun rights, it's the same thing. Like, just one more law and we'll stop mass shootings. One more, and it just, like, defies the laws of reality. That you're not really banning anything. You're just driving it underground and removing mechanisms of accountability. Like, the more you ban it, the more it gets out of your control.
Yeah. And they think that, well, a lot of people think that, okay, well, if we just vote hard enough, maybe they'll leave our guns alone. And it's like, no, unfortunately, it comes down to, and this is the thing that scares a lot of people coming from a more conservative place, is they've been raised on this idea of law and order. And as was I, I was a military brat, law and order, and everything has to be kind of a system and regimented and all that kind of thing. And it's like, well, what has that done for us? It's put us in a cage, and this country in particular meant to be kind of the last bastion of freedom and liberty and all of that, and yet we're signing away our independence to bureaucrats who are hopefully going to vote for us, vote for our way of life. Being an armed individual who's incapable of being taken over. Rifle behind every blade of grass and all that. And instead, we're like outsourcing our responsibility for our own rights to men in suits who couldn't handle an AR if you fucking, if you gave them an instruction manual. Instead, people have realized, oh, it's non-compliance. That's what won the prohibition on alcohol. That's what is winning the war on drugs, is non-compliance. And what's going to win the war on guns is also non-compliance. And so, okay, now we're out of that political arena. Like, the voting didn't work. It never worked. It was just the tiniest bit of brakes on the inevitable erosion of government trying to have a full monopoly on violence with a disarmed citizenry. So I wonder if that same solution applies to the people in power. If instead of voting again and again and again and hoping that the next guy takes his boot off my neck, instead, maybe we push the boot off our neck. And not in a violent way, but with independence, with setting up yourself in a way, in a non-political way, to be free of that boot, to be independent, to not rely on those systems.
Beautifully said. And there's a great talk by Larkin Rose, who's one of my favorite living
Ah,
anarchists.
yep, likewise.
Yeah, you can find it on YouTube. It was from Anarchapulco, kind of in the earlier years, and it's called So Small a Thing. And he's a Lord of the Rings nerd. I admit I have not read Lord of the Rings, but as I came to understand it, like the so small a thing is that it doesn't have to be like you go to war with the cops and the military and you actually have to commit violence. The so small a thing is shifting that perspective. Like, no, they don't actually have authority over me. And a way that he's explained it that I think is so great. I did his Candles in the Dark seminar, which is mind blowing. And that was actually a turning point for me in being like less of a bitch in my videos, even though I'm still very sassy. Like, I feel like I'm not just like oozing anger out of my pores in my videos anymore. I'm like a little more lighthearted about it.
That's like an early days anarchist thing, because me as well, when my first account, if anyone remembers Bloody Revolutions, I was fucking pissed. I got to the States, I realized things weren't, like, I wasn't instantly free, and there was still like a lot of tyranny happening here, and I was fucking angry. And a lot of people, when they first kind of get over that big line and figure out what governments and living under a government is really about, is that control, whether you hit the red or blue button, you're angry. And it's coming past that to the peaceful side where you can start to make solutions and kind of, instead of being like raging against the system 24/7, which is exhausting, you're like, you can do so much more of it. But anyway, I'm sure we'll dig into that more. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's important. It's really important. And for me, so this is like for me, this is one of the best ways to explain anarchism. And like you're talking about this monopoly on violence, and we're laughing at the notion of representation. But the way Larkin puts it is like, okay, ask someone, like, if somebody comes to your door and they say that you owe them money and you don't, you're gonna be like, no, like, fuck off. I don't owe you anything. If two people come to your door and they demand money, you're gonna be like, absolutely not. If three people come, you're still gonna be like, I don't owe you money. Get the fuck off my porch. But if it's the government and they're calling themselves Congress, or they're calling themselves the legislature, suddenly like this magical authority comes to mind and you don't question it. So they get this moral exception. Suddenly they have a right to take your income, to fund their power and to fund their programs or whatever. And the way that Larkin phrases it, I always quote Larkin because I just think he's such a good articulator. Like, he just boils it down to the most common denominator. And the question is like, okay, if you don't have the right to steal and kill, how do you give that right to someone else vis-a-vis representation and elections? Like, if you don't have that right, how come they do? And you're the one allegedly putting them in power. How do you transfer a right you don't have? And I haven't heard anyone answer that accurately because, I mean, I'm biased, but like, there is no answer to that because you can't. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. It's all imaginary. We imagine that we give them authority and they have the power to do these things in our name. But if we don't have the right to do that morally, they don't either, because they are just people and they do such a good job. And it sounds like so nefarious and cryptic, but like the people in power, I'm not saying that it's like, I'm sure they believe it themselves. That's a crazy thing. It's like some of them they know that it's all a scam and they know that they're exploiting people and propagandizing people. But I think a lot of the people in power don't. They truly believe in it. And that doesn't mean they're acting in principle or with principle, but like they buy their own bullshit, you know?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. They've sold themselves on the fact that while they're doing insider trading, that they're serving the people. They're like sniffing their own bullshit so fucking hard that they're like, I'm such a good person for doing this for my constituents, as they fucking make, like end up retiring with millions in the bank.
Yeah, they're servants. They're public servants. It's crazy. And like, that's the problem, is like, we are being led by the insane, whether they're just straight up sociopaths or whether they're like well-meaning delusional psychos, like, well, that's not fair to call them psychos if they mean well. Like, but again, like, that's the thing, is I think it was Milton Friedman he talked about like intentions don't matter, outcomes matter. Like, that's a huge paraphrase. I can't think of the exact wording, but like, it doesn't matter how well intended you are. It doesn't matter how many poor people you want to feed and house. Like, if the means to get to your end are immoral and then the end isn't even achieved, like, who cares? I don't care that you mean well. And everyone means well. And that's the other thing, is I think so many people have such a negative outlook on the world and on humanity, of like, oh, well, everybody's bad, so we need to put people in power to control the bad people. Like, I've had this conversation so many times, and I'm like, dude, you're talking in circles. Okay, let's say people are bad. Why would you give them central authority? And like, this isn't to say that I believe everybody's good and we can just abolish the government. We're all going to get along. It's going to be peaceful. Like, no, I don't believe that. I think a lot of people are good. I don't think as many people are evil as the government defenders like to say when they're making that argument. I guess it's like the Hobbesian argument. Like, I don't think it's that bad, but like, yeah, there are bad people. And where do they go? Government, where they're not going to be held accountable and where they can exert power over other people. I think it actually, speaking of Lord of the Rings with Larkin, like I think there's a J.R.R. I'm going to butcher his name. Is it Tolkien? Tolkien,
yeah.
Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings. He said that he was like, he leans toward anarchism because no one has the power to rule over another. And least of all, the person who wants it, you know, like, I don't trust people who think that they know enough to make decisions for millions of people. Like, absolutely not. You're the last person I want making decisions for me.
That is some wild stuff when we think that a bunch of old blue bloods descended from powerful people, effectively modern kings in suits and ties and pantsuits, are like somehow the optimal human being. Like, this is the very best humanity has to offer. Like, hell no, it's not. But that Tolkien quote, which I love, my political opinions lean more and more to anarchy. The most improper job of any man, even saints, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity.
Oh yeah, that's so much better than my paraphrase. I love that.
No, you were like on it, but what was that last one? And least of all those who seek the opportunity. Yeah, that is like that's terrifying. Like, dude, are you the best person? Are you really running your life like optimally? Are you so good at being a person that you know how all of us should live? Fuck off. I've seen some of those people and seen some of the headlines that come out about them. Nah.
Right. Like, they're just human beings. And the last thing I want to say to that is like, well, then they cite that they got majority rule. They got 51 to 49%, which, like, first of all, is pathetic. Like,
they're
that
popular.
is no
they're
way.
Really popular.
Right. But the thing is, like, the majority has been so like massaged into meaning moral. Like, oh, well, if the majority of people want it, well, then it's a good thing. There are a lot of things in American history and world history that the majority wanted that were atrocious and just like morally repugnant. I don't go with the majority. That's no indicator. Like, yeah, sometimes the majority is going to be right, like a broken clock, you know, but like oftentimes they're not. And broken clock isn't fair because I think a lot of times, like, sure, there is a majority. Like, most people would say murder is wrong. Yeah, correct. Yes. But that just because they're right sometimes does not mean that they are universally correct and can be trusted. And I think we've seen this, especially in the last few years, but really throughout history. Yep. Like, a majority of people were totally approving of George Bush invading Iraq. And that was based, I mean, it's not their fault, kind of. It was based on government lies, and they were traumatized by 9/11. Like, I understand. That doesn't mean it was the right decision. And it, in fact, has caused so much harm domestically and abroad. It's disrupted so much. It's created more terrorism. So many innocent people have died. Yeah, well, but the majority wanted it. They were cool with it. The polls said that the majority wanted, so it must have been fine at the time. I'll stop. That's it. I've said my piece.
No, we can do plenty more anti-war. BR here with a quick word from our newest sponsor of the show that made our first video podcast possible, the great people over at Attorneys for Freedom. Attorneys for Freedom are a real criminal defense law firm offering attorneys on retainer for legal representation in self-defense cases, and are not some insurance company or provider. This means that Attorneys for Freedom are able to cover scenarios that are often denied coverage by other programs. Self-defense scenarios such as while in gun-free zones or sensitive areas, while under the influence or on medication, scenarios where you knew your attacker, and while using any
weapon in self-defense, from a firearm to a household object or otherwise. Additionally, attorneys for freedom will not drop you from coverage, nor will they ever ask you to pay them back. Even if you take a plea deal where you admit guilt to a criminal act, attorneys for freedom will not ask to recoup their fees. Attorneys for freedom covers 100% of your attorney's fees in the event they can reasonably argue that you were acting in self-defense, and now you're facing serious felony charges. The primary key to coverage is their ability to reasonably argue self-defense in court. Nathan and I have signed up already, and you can too in no time at all. The National Self-Protection Plan is available with a one-time sign-up fee of $100 and just $35 per month after that. Family plans and annual rates are also available. Signing up via the link in the show notes or via the Seaburn Art Instagram bio link helps support the show with both your initial sign-up and every month you retain Attorneys for Freedom services. Get covered in all 50 states, support the show, and have peace of mind that should your worst day come, Attorneys for Freedom has your back. Thanks for listening, people. How's it going, lads and ladies? BR here with a quick word from the longest running sponsor of the Art and War podcast, Advanced Warfighting Solutions. AWS have been making tough as hell gear for decades right here in the US in North Carolina. Nathan, myself, and thousands of others run that gear through the ringer and trust our lives to it, whether that's LARPing in the woods or dragging kit through war zones. AWS manufactures many great packs, pouches, plate carriers, and our personal favorite, the SMU Operator Belt. A set-and-forget gun belt that crushes in build quality, capability, and excellent feedback from its many users. We are tough on our gear here at Art and War, and the SMU takes that treatment in its stride. Though already at a sweet price point, you can knock $10 more off your SMU belt with the code ARTandWar10 at awsin.com. The code and link to the AWS website can be found in the show description. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the show.
Like I said earlier, when we speak about anarchism, I think a lot of people, and we haven't really dug into it too much on this show because it's kind of, I think it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. They hear anarchy, and a lot of people might know me as, oh, the anarchist guy on Art and War, or like, oh, anarch is in my name and stuff, and it's like, but what does that mean? Anarchism is so, it sounds crazy. It's what we describe, like, if there was no government tomorrow, what would there be? Anarchy, and people are like, oh, cars burning and looting and raiders and everything's Mad Max. It's this bad word, but like it comes from such a place of peace, of not, instead of every single day you're signing up to endorse violence that absolutely will happen, you're saying, what if we did away with like automatic violence? Every single war for profit and every single law enforced to enrich someone running a private prison. We were just like, no more. And we cut back to people making decisions for themselves and people plugging back into their communities and taking their destiny into their own hands instead of, just kind of, oh, what is the country doing today? Oh, endless war. Okay, that's a good idea. Like, yeah, we should...
Same as last year, and the year before, and the decade before that, and the century before that.
I love tradition. But if people think that there is a way to rescue our current way of doing things, which, like, clearly it's burning out a little bit. Can we not agree on that much, that things are not on the rise, and that there is no kind of big swing on the horizon? Like this like it sounds really doom and gloom, but just kind of the way that we're going currently is clearly not any kind of solution and not offering any kind of solution. And I'm trying to like put this across in a way that's not hippy dippy, because like this country was not founded as an empire, and that's kind of something that I try and communicate to a lot of people who might be coming from a more constitutional mindset. Is a lot of people fancy themselves as like old school Americans, and I think to a degree there's a lot of value in that, especially like the more American school of thought on anarchism, like your Lysander Spooner, and that whole place where it's like very individualistic and very like rugged individual, like frontiersmen, homesteaders, decentralizing empires and stuff. And I think a lot of people, like, libertarians often say, like, most people are libertarians, they just don't know it. And it's kind of a tired thing to say, but I truly believe that to a degree. Like, how many people, like you were saying, there's so many people who aren't inherently evil, who aren't setting out to be like, I want to rule over someone. Like progressives, for example, like a lot of conservatives might feel that liberals are these tyrants, and because they're using the state to accomplish, you know, their means end. Yeah, they are tyrants. They can be tyrants. They vote in tyrannical systems that could have people kick in your door for your guns, or who might pull you out of church and cuff you and tase you on the ground because you were told that you couldn't gather in big groups or whatever it might be. Whatever the edict of the week is. And so, we are pitted against people who have good intentions. They care about people. They want, equal rights for people. They want everyone to be respected and things like that. There's a lot of value in that. And same for kind of conservatives who liberals might view as tyrants. They want law and order, and they want they don't want their kids to be around drugs and crime and all that kind of thing. And it's like, well, these people aren't trying to. They're not trying to. Some people do vote in policies because they might hurt someone, but so many people, a minority of people. Some people are malicious. Fuck those guys. But the vast majority of people are trying to. They're trying to make their community better, and they're outsourcing that to, unfortunately, a place that doesn't have that same intent. Long story short, what I'm trying to get at is, like, coming to the conclusion that the end goal of both sides trying to make the world better is the potential for more violence. It's trying to wrap this with a bow. Well, it's something that you've talked about, is kind of understanding, like, your own trauma before you go out and try and fix the world. And for a lot of us coming from different political places, we might not realize how we've been programmed and kind of where we're at on that spectrum. And so we try and force that into a new worldview once we start to understand that, the state is violent or whatever. And coming out of that and realizing, I felt I had these ideas and I thought the world needed to be fixed this way, was because I was trying to fix it. I'm getting lost in the sticks, Carey.
No, I know what you mean, though, and it's...
I can't wrap it with a bow.
It doesn't need a bow. That's the thing. Like, it's because I think what happens is, like, we're bringing our own personal biases, which are fine. Yeah. We are all going to have personal biases, but, like, the problem is believing that we have a right to, like, we have a right and a moral authority to impose those through the state. And that actually kind of brings me, something I wanted to say was, like, we're kind of laughing at, like, law and order, but, like, I don't think there's anything, like, I understand why that matters to people. Like, they want streets to be safe. Crimes are not okay. It's not okay to steal from people and bash in their businesses. Like, I don't want to make light of that. But I think the problem with that mentality is the failure to see how laws and how government policies have created this disorder. Like, if you want to stop the disorder, you have to understand what drives people to that. And very often, it's government policy. It's things that impoverish people and make them desperate. It's the drug war that throws people in prison and breaks up families. Like, these are, you always trace it back to the government. I'm not saying every single problem in, quote, society is because of the government, but there's a very good chance they're involved.
Like, the thing that's universal, and a lot of people accuse anarchists of being utopian, like, without a government, how are you gonna fix this? How are you gonna fix that? And all of a sudden, like, the anarchist is on the spot solving all of humanity's problems, not necessarily even government's problems. Like, well, what if someone does this? It's like, well, what would you do if, say someone stole from you? Like, like, are you going to go after him and get your property back? Are you satisfied with that? Does there need to be more punishment? And you're likely going to live around people who, ideally, who kind of have the same terms as you, who kind of see the same, who believe in the same forms of restitution and all that kind of thing. Like these things are
Right.
pretty. There's a lot of common human sentiment around that kind of thing about how, like, what is fair. We all have a general innate human opinion on what that is, and would gather around people who feel the same way. And the fact that at the minute the state is the one to decide how someone who harms you is punished or how they make amends to you, and it can very often just do absolutely nothing for the victim. The individual victims need to be able to decide kind of how things are fixed for them, rather than the state kind of giving a blanket solution.
Right, exactly. And I think that like people want the certainty, they want to have the answer, they want it to be done a certain way. But the beauty of anarchism is like, I don't have to have every answer. There are billions of people on this planet who have the capacity to problem solve and to think of new things. Like my strength happens to be in debunking statism. And that's where I like to put my attention because I'm good at it. Personally, is what I think. Like maybe I'm not. I mean, I'm not very good at converting liberals. I'm much more effective at changing the minds of right wingers. So just liberals hate me. Like I do not get through to them, and that's fine. Somebody else can talk to liberals about it. But the beauty of it is that like at its core, it's decentralized, ideally down to the individual, but obviously we're human beings operating in a world with other human beings. But it's that decentralization. It's this notion of like, maybe there are different ways to do things. And I think speaking to that, like, look at the DMV. They have a monopoly on your right to drive. And it is the worst. I was recently like in a completely other, I was in Tennessee and I'm from California, and I was just at the bank, and like this woman was looking at my ID and she was like, "Oh, you got to renew your ID soon." And we just like had a whole conversation about the DMV. So whether it's like a red state or a blue state, why is it the same? Because they have no accountability and they have the right to take your money. And if you don't give them the money, they have the right to take your property. And if you fight them on taking the property, they can call the authorities and they can use violence against you. And if you resist that violence, well, you're the bad one. You're the wrong one. You shouldn't have resisted. There's no competing agency that can certify somebody's qualifications for operating a motor vehicle, like not in like, let alone somebody just driving without the proper license. Oh my God. Like but like when you look at what happens when there's no competition, whether that's for the fiat currency, the dollar, or it's the DMV, or it's protection services like police, when people have no other option, they have no recourse. And the government, with its violence, does a very good job of monopolizing all of these services and providing them at high cost and low effectiveness. And there's nothing people can do unless they choose to disobey and to stop believing in the idea that only the DMV should have the authority to license people to drive. And what does that mean? You pay them a fee and all of a sudden you get your right back. Like that they don't do anything effective or helpful. And I'm just asking for a little competition here. And like the problem with that is you see like with cryptocurrency, how quickly the authorities and the establishment have come down and tried to stop it. They don't like competition because that competition might show that they're inept and that they're oppressive and they don't serve people and that their system fucking sucks. So they try to shut it down whenever possible, which is like people are like, oh, well, obviously Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and I'm not saying the same person says this, but like I'm pushing it together like two different opinions. Bernie Sanders was the revolutionary and Trump is the revolutionary because look at what they did to him. The fact that, the media hates him, it's proof. Like, no, it's proof that that's how intolerant they are of so much as rhetoric that questions the system. It doesn't mean these people are actual threats to the system. It means that so much as questioning the system is enough to get the full wrath of that system on you because they do not tolerate dissent. And yes, like they'll let you have your little protests and they'll let you stand out in the streets. But when it comes to actually challenging their authority, there is zero tolerance.
Yeah, we have seen a fair bit of that in the last few years.
Yep.
Like worldwide. Canadians getting trampled in the streets and their bank accounts frozen for standing up against being able to go outside or not.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, call it whatever you want. Call it your Republican form of government. Call it your democracy. Call it your dictatorship. It doesn't matter because it doesn't matter what system of government it is. The root is always violence. It's always their authority over your rights. in your ability to be free and live as you wish. And yeah, you can dress it up in representation and special rituals to vote in as somebody who represents you, but they're still going to rule by power and by authority. And it's like, and it's funny because this is actually an argument from the gun crowd. You know, like you see these Hollywood liberals calling for gun control, and they go to their little events surrounded by armed security. And these politicians calling for gun control, they have their little government agents who are armed with guns. Like, the hypocrisy is staggering. But the thing is, it doesn't just apply to gun rights, it applies to all of your rights.
Sorry, I'm getting lost in the source.
It's okay. We're talking about like a lot of layers of stuff here, and you mentioned trauma, and I'm like, oh man, I want to get into that too.
Oh well, I mean, so that's something like I kind of, when you first started talking about trauma and stuff like that, I was like, at first I knew what you were saying, but I was like, does that apply to me? And I was like, oh my god, it does, because like. I mean, like I said, military brat. There's a lot of damage there. It is not great for you. And I had always had kind of a anti-authoritarian streak in me, but I was like, when I was younger, I was like, I don't know who to be mad at. Like it was like when I was really young, I was just fucking angry, like as a lot of young people are.
Yeah.
But like, I realized as I got a little bit older and understood kind of what authority was more and more, it was teachers who really weren't, like, who really shouldn't have been in that job, who had authority, and whose final answer, instead of something intelligent, instead of something you can work with, it was something like, because I said so. And you're like, okay, well, that tells me nothing. And I started to realize, oh, adults aren't always right. Like, there are stupid adults, and when you become an adult, you really realize that. You're like, oh wow, there's people who are twice my age, who have been on this planet like longer than, like, over half a century, who still don't know shit. And kind of having even like 10% of that realization as a kid, you're like, kind of like unlodges your trust in authority. You're like, oh, adults can be wrong sometimes. Oh, that's kind of scary. Okay.
Yeah, it's very scary. And it, you know, we want to look to these other people outside ourselves. And it's such like like as a child, yeah, duh, you're dependent on somebody else for your survival. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of a person they might be. If you depend on them for survival, like, you kind of got to stick with it. And it's like that mentality kind of sticks with us into the political process of like, well, I got to vote for somebody. Somebody has to fix this. Yeah, exactly. I need a daddy and mommy government. But like, I also, before we talk too much about trauma, like, I want to clarify, like, I have a feeling generally that people who are very enthusiastic about gun rights, like, I think the Venn diagram of people who are also very interested in like diving into their trauma and like engaged in like emotional healing, like, I think that little intersection is very small.
I think those are two different circles who are like awkwardly standing across from each other at the party. Like the sheer amount of memes where the guy's standing in the corner, or it's like or a fucking guy refuses to go to therapy, or what the fuck is that? How's that meme go?
Is that like they don't know? Is that the one?
Yeah, they don't know, but they don't. But yeah, and then also guys will literally blah 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 instead of going to therapy. Yeah. Like, it's also so painfully fucking true. But I mean, unfortunately, reality of living in the 21st century is you're probably traumatized somehow, and it doesn't make you a bitch. It doesn't make you weak or less of a man. Like, but there's some weird psyops going on and have been going on since we, like, you know, the majority of us were in I was gonna say in diapers, but it sounds so wrong to say diapers. That's such an American word, but I've been over here so long. I guess I just gotta say it now. But no, like that is an interesting note, because a lot of people are gonna hear, oh, trauma. You guys want to talk about trauma, and it's like, yeah, because like we live in a crazy fucking world. I mean, you know, I'll go first, guys. Like, just aside from the military kid stuff, and you know, my fellow military brats will understand that without having to dig too much into it. You know, dad being away for months and months on end, and even a year at times, and then realizing, like I was saying, that adults aren't always right. So you're like, oh, so the adults sending my dad places might not always be right. and just
Right.
having even that thought, you're like, well, fuck, how do I trust those people with my dad's safety? And but aside from that, also like the last few years, a lot of us were forcibly isolated. Not saying that like, of your own accord, live your life and continue what you were doing, but like my job, all of my jobs outside of my social hours where I could go and hang out with people, I was on my own for most of the pandemic, like just forcibly
Mm.
alternating shifts with people, so only one of us were in the office at a time, or working from home, or whatever it might have been. Like I spent the bulk of 3 years, if I wasn't at home with my lady, or like of my own time hanging out with friends when I quote unquote shouldn't have been, or whatever the hell, I was alone, which is fucking weird, and I realized that had some effect on me. But traumas, like how would you kind of introduce this in the political world?
Yeah.
Like in
So
terms of kind of
trauma.
coming face to face with it and what that means.
Yeah. So first I want to say, like, I know that there's a really strong sentiment of like, oh, trauma's for bitches. And I want to honor that, because when you look at the left, the way that they have just like this unmitigated ooze of feelings that they barf out onto the political system and demand that you cater to their feelings. So
Make
like
it
that's
make
not
it
what I'm
everyone
talking
else's
about.
problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not what I'm talking about. That is like some very emotionally unconscious behavior, because they aren't taking the time to be aware of and to process their feelings. And again, like, oh, feelings, that's for bitches. But like, I would argue that it's more bitch behavior to avoid your feelings because you can't sit with them because they're uncomfortable than it
Mm,
is to just like dive into them and see what arises. Because yeah, like I had a difficult upbringing too. And so I'm going to tie this back into the political system now, but give me a couple steps, because I used to have a news organization. We were called the Anti-Media, and I was with them from
mm.
2014 to 2018. It was after my first video went viral, which is like I blowtorched an Obama shirt. I'm sure there were some issues coming up in that video, but whatever. I have no regrets.
Hell yeah.
But so we had this news organization. We reached millions of people every week. Sorry, my dog just shook herself out. I don't know if that is going to show up on the audio, but we reached millions of people every week. It was my dream job. We were talking about all the issues that we're talking about now. I was editor in chief. I worked with some incredible people, and we were like just this little ragtag organization, like poking the bear every single week. And we partnered with the Free Thought Project. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Free Thought Project. But we were actually having an effect. And in 2018, right before the midterms, we got banned. Like Free Thought Project got taken out. We got taken out. I was banned from Twitter, like completely separately. Like it was like a and our biggest following was Facebook. So remember, this was like years ago when Facebook still mattered and was relevant, but it was like two different platforms in the same day wiped us out. Like we lost our jobs, we lost our reach, we lost like what mattered most to us. And that on itself, like on its face, that is so incredibly difficult. But I had such a hard time with it. Like I'm still heartbroken about it, honestly, but like I had to stop and I had to sit with like, why is this so painful? Obviously, it's painful because this is something I deeply care about and it's been ripped away from me. But like, when have I felt silenced before? When have I felt powerless? When have I felt like I can't trust myself? Because they were calling us like useful idiots for Russia. And I had to sit there and be like, wait, am I parroting Russian propaganda? And then I was like, no, fuck you. No, I'm not. I'm just an anti-imperialist. Like, but it like made me question my own sense of reality. And like, as it turns out, none of these feelings were new. These are things that I had felt in my childhood. I don't need to get into the details. Everybody has a difficult childhood. Not everybody, I don't know, but like everybody has something that's difficult as a human being. And I
Yeah.
started to realize
We all have our fun little quirks from childhood.
for sure.
Even if your parents were awesome, they probably
Right.
fucked up a little bit somewhere, one like a few times, and now you just have a weird quirk, and that's
And
like
it's
most
fine.
people.
And it's fine. It's not a matter of like judging it or shaming it, but like rather bringing it into awareness. And so for me,
Yeah.
like after losing the Anti-Media, so much of my inner work was around diving into the deeper feelings around it. And honestly, that's probably why I got into what I do in the first place. Of like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to be silenced. I'm not going to be told what reality is. I can trust myself. And honestly, like that's what's driven a lot of my work, and I'm grateful for it. But it took me like really turning inward and creating. I sound like such a liberal yoga teacher, like creating space for
I love it.
for all that was arising. Like, that's not easy. It actually is quite hard. And I mean, it's not as hard as ignoring it. That's the thing, is if you ignore these things, you ignore these feelings, you shut them down, you avoid them, like they will come back to bite you in the ass. They're not just going to disappear. Like, you can't just suppress them. But as this relates to the political system, sorry, this is a very roundabout way of saying that
No.
most of us, including myself, on any given day, like some days I'm super aware and conscious and present, and others I am just like a little demon, like lashing out, and like my unconscious shit is running the show. But the problem is when you believe in government and you believe in democracy and you believe in this violent authority, whether or not you understand that that's what it is, and you're not aware of how all of these reactive emotions that are personal to you are then bleeding out into the political space, then you get the climate we have right now. Like, you have all these liberals who probably just have some really fucked up mommy and daddy issues coming out into on social media, demanding that everyone cater to them and that we have this big daddy government to take care of us, when really maybe you were abandoned as a child. And I'm not judging that, but like, maybe you need to sit with that. Like, maybe you need to be a little more conscious of how you are bringing your own personal bullshit into the public arena and demanding that other people be responsible for it. And a great example of this is, I can't remember his name. I want to say it's either Jack Kornfield or with a K, or John Kabat-Zinn. I can't remember which. They're both like meditation teachers, but I listened to an incredible podcast, and they had worked with veterans, like traumatized veterans with PTSD, but every reason to be traumatized. They had seen things that fundamentally altered the way they saw the world and really changed the way their bodies even operated, because more research is showing that trauma affects you like on a physiological level. It's not just in your head. But anyway, he had worked with these veterans, and what he found was that they had issues before they ever joined the military. And in fact, it was often those issues that led them to want to join. It was like a sense of feeling powerless or feeling small or feeling unseen. And then they saw the military as an opportunity to correct that. And without getting too deep into like psychology or whatever, that's like, that could be called repetition compulsion. Of like, you put yourself in the same position hoping for a different outcome. So what happens, like, I talk to a lot of anarchist veterans, and from their perspective, like, they got into it wanting to do good, probably wanting to feel like they had some power, like they could make a difference, but they don't have it. They ended up being cogs in the machine. And I don't, forget the anarchist veterans like Smedley Butler. I don't think he was an anarchist, but he saw through the system. What was his book called? War is a Racket. War is a Racket.
Yep, War is a Racket. If you haven't read that, definitely pick it up. It's no. It's tiny for the listeners. Like, pick it up, especially if you're a vet. Like, it'll piss you off, but it'll also make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and this isn't to say like, oh, if you join the military, you're fucked up. Like, because that's the thing, is like, I don't view trauma as necessarily a negative. It's something that just happens to us as human beings. And yeah, it's more severe in in some people than others. But like, as human beings, we have feelings. To deny the fact that we have feelings is just denying reality. Like, you're just as dumb as a liberal, just on the other side of it. So to me, it's so important to really get real with ourselves and start paying attention to what's going on inside of us. Otherwise, we are going to be slaves to our own reactivity. And that then plays out in the political system. And like, I've said this before, I'll say it again, like, no way Hillary Clinton had a nice childhood. There's no way that woman was emotionally well-adjusted, like, she has so many layers of problems. That doesn't mean that what she does is okay. It doesn't mean it's forgivable. It doesn't mean that it should be allowed to continue happening. I know she's not technically in power right now, but she's a very powerful person. But like, you're not excusing bad things people do to understand that there's a very good chance they are acting from their own pain. And until we get to the root of that pain, the same cycles are going to keep playing out over and over and over, because we're not conscious. And again, like, we are controlled by things that we're not even aware of. And that's why I think it's so important to do that kind of work. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's not for the weak. It's not weak work. It is if you're just like, oh, I'm a victim and poor me and this happened and that happened. Like, that's not compassion. That's just like indulgence of victimhood, but like, there is a sweet spot of allowing yourself to feel your feelings, but not letting them control you. And there's this like, oh, control your feelings. You got to control your feelings. I'm like, that is the worst thing. Like, you have to, you don't want them to control you, but like, it's just like the mirror image of like, let me control them. Like, there is a way that I've found, at least for myself, to create space for the feelings, like become a container for them, be compassionate toward them, like give yourself a little love, and also be like, and you will not control my decisions. You're not going to, make me go screaming in the street demanding climate justice, like, and again, like, it's okay to care about the environment, but asking Big Daddy government, which is the biggest polluter in the world, to save you from pollution and save the environment, like, that's just kind of dumb. That doesn't really, it's not rational. It's very irrational. So I think if we really want to be rational, we have to make room for those feelings rather than deny that they exist or lean into them so hard that, like, we lose all sense of critical thinking. Sorry, that was a really long, but I'm glad you let me get it off my chest. Thank you.
No. Like, I think that stuff is so important because, like I was saying, in my early days when I was just fucking angry and it was just like the edgiest, spiciest memes I could come out with, and like I'm gonna have to bleep this in post, but whenever I, like whenever a politician would do something heinously evil and proclaim some new edict, or like how they're going to come for guns and indifferent to the people's lives that it would ruin with like red flag laws and stuff like that, I'd tag the politician in the old days of Instagram where you didn't get insta-banned for this, and it'd be like, hey, Representative, Robert Dick, or whatever the fuck, you should fucking tickle yourself, fuck you, and all that kind of thing. And it's like, wow, that felt good, and got a bunch of, everyone's like, ha, that's awesome, and go to the comments and tell them, fuck you, you suck. It's like, okay, that's fun. That's a lot of fun, and it makes everyone feel better for about 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, the world is exactly as it was 5 minutes ago. We have not made any, we told a politician to go and fuck themselves, and maybe they actually run their account and it's not some intern, and they saw it and they're like, oh, gee, people really don't like me. That sucks. Back to some insider trading. Or the BR who has now been doing this for like longer than 5 years and has grown up a little bit, is a little bit more calm, thank God. We've gone to a place where it's like, okay, it feels great to say that shit, and I still feel that way. However, now instead of just that minute of rage and that pure emotional response, I've kind of recognized, it's not effective. It doesn't really do anything for us. And as evil and awful as these people are, like, that's not a solution. And recognizing that, instead of just being angry and indulging that same reaction to the world, whereas it might have been like beforehand, fuck these guys, I'm gonna vote for the other party, like angrily,
Right.
like with real vigor or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, the anger's not really doing much, and even if I vote really hard, it's also not doing much. So how about we calm down a little bit and we figure out what I can actually do today to make myself more free than I was yesterday. How can I spite these ivory tower motherfuckers in a way that's actually more effective than tagging their social media account and telling them fuck you.
Even though it's really fun.
Yeah, it's very fun, but how can I actually go out and do something that says fuck you, and will make sure that my kids and my grandkids can also say fuck you in their actions and not be angrily voting or tagging politicians in 50 years. So that was me dealing with my trauma.
No, that's beautiful. And as you were speaking, it reminded me of something that I've been seeing. Like, I'm in California still. Like, I wish I weren't, but I am for good reasons. But hopefully not for long. Regardless, I have had so many conversations with Californians and liberals recently, and they are so happy that Donald Trump has been indicted. Like, the amount of hatred they harbor for this man, who, by the way, would have no authority if it weren't for the system these people think they're trying to save. Like, democracy got you, Donald Trump, idiot. Sorry, I shouldn't call names. I need to examine my own trauma and who's in the driver's seat right now. No, but it's just like the amount of like giddiness I've been seeing from these people which is an extension of their hatred for him. This is like the prime example of what I'm talking about, of like, he has become such an avatar for people's personal shit. Like whether it's on the left or right, whether they want to believe that Donald Trump is the savior who's going to save everybody, or they think that he is literally worse than Hitler and he is the downfall of human civilization. Like, I'm focusing more on liberals right now because it's more glaring, but like, it's honestly kind of scary to see, because these are people who genuinely believe that they are for compassion and tolerance and love and equity and all of these really nice buzzwords. But when push comes to shove, like, they're just vomiting out all of their darkness onto Donald Trump and blaming him, so they don't have to honestly look at their own trauma and look at the nature of the system and how it operates. If they can just blame Donald Trump and everything was fine before Donald Trump, like, no, it wasn't perfect, but we were making progress and Barack Obama was president and he never had a scandal. Like, never mind, there's like volumes of scandals from Barack Obama. Like, it's such a form of avoidance of like, let me just put it all on Donald Trump so I don't have to look inward. And as an extension, because they believe, quote, we are the government, they don't have to examine, they don't have to get introspective about that either. And they get to just project all of their suffering onto Donald Trump. And they give him so much power that way. Like, it's like, I don't think they realize that he loves it. Like, he can bristle and he can bluster and he can go on and on about the liberals, but like, they made him. The reason he got attention was Hillary Clinton wanting to, I mean, not single-handedly, but like Hillary Clinton wanted him to be a Pied Piper candidate and instructed her media lapdogs to elevate Donald Trump, because this is all from WikiLeaks. Like, this, everybody knows, well, not everybody, it's not like Donald Trump, everybody knows this, but like, it's like, this is well known. Like, I'm not saying anything new. I'm sure most of your listeners know this, but like, it's such a perfect example of what happens when you don't take responsibility for your own feelings. You end up obsessing over Donald Trump and becoming completely delusional about reality.
Yeah. We're at a point now where people, like you said, avatars, like, it's all so far removed from people seeking out solutions. Like, there's so much outsourcing, and it seems like every few years, like, there's more and more outsourcing. It's, what more can the government do for me? What more can not be my problem? And what else can I give for them to solve? And we're at a point now, and you know, to your point with the trauma and stuff, now it's not just like, oh, well, I'll hit the red or blue button and go home. Like, it's turned into reality TV now, and we have heroes, I mean, even more so than it's ever been, where we have, you know, good guys and bad guys, and, oh, these are the villains in my life, like you're saying. Like, you know, for the conservatives, oh, Hillary and Obama and Biden are the only reason my life is bad. And for the liberals, oh, Trump and Bush and all that, well, not even Bush anymore, they're starting
They love him now because he was mean to Donald Trump.
He bombed the Middle East in such a classy fashion. I really wish we could return to Republicans that were like that, who lied through their teeth in just a more reliable conservative way than this bombastic nationalist stuff. Wild.
Yeah, it really is like upside down clown world, like more, and it always has been. And that's the thing, is like, yeah, it's more glaring now, and in a way that's good, because it's forced so many people to re-examine their beliefs and what they took for granted about the system, and they're now seeing it more for what it is. But like, it's always been this way. There's always been people who were willing to violate principles, and like, you look at the founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson. I was reading some of his letters like last year, and he's literally writing, he's like, well, I think the Louisiana Purchase is going to require like a constitutional amendment, and then like didn't get the constitutional amendment, you know, like, it's just like, man, never mind. And like,
fuck it, we're the kings, it's good to be the king.
Yeah, right. Well, fuck it, let's just do it. This is what I want. Or like it was Alien and Sedition Acts. I think that was John Adams. I could be wrong, fact check me, but you know, that was very much like antithetical to the Constitution and free speech, but they went and did it anyway because they didn't like their enemies. And I just want to bring it back. Like, I will shut up about trauma, I promise. But like, just to bring it back to like, yeah, those guys had trauma too. When you read their biographies, holy shit, the amount of loss they experienced, like losing their parents, losing their brothers. Like, Andrew Jackson lost like, I think 2 brothers and then his mother, and his dad died before he was born. Like, what does that do to a person? you know, like it doesn't excuse things they did. And I know some people love Andrew Jackson and he was cool on banks, and like other things he was really not so cool, like very not cool, and like very, again, very violative of the Constitution. But again, like they're just people. And like this weird, like, oh, our founding daddies, like I know nobody really calls it that, but that's essentially what they're saying. Like
That's what it is.
it is, and it's so weird. It's like, dude, they were just people, and they were like, they did some incredible things. Like I thought I wanted to be a constitutional lawyer before I went all anarchy. Like I studied a lot of constitutional history, and like they had incredible ideas. They were incredibly advanced, and as far as I'm concerned, the values that they were fighting for were more anarchist than they were like constitutionalist. And like that's very bold of me to be like, well, I understand what they wanted more than they did. But like the things they were getting at were so fundamentally anarchist. Like the idea of like limiting government, and the government doesn't get to do these things. To me, it's just like anarchism is the logical progression from that. However flawed they might have been, however poorly they might have lived out the principles, and however many mistakes they made, like they were definitely on the right track. It was absolutely evolutionary, both. It was evolutionary and revolutionary. It changed the world. It changed the way so many people think about freedom and government. And there's still room to evolve. And they were not mythical, magical superheroes. They were just people.
Yeah, and that's like the really interesting thing when you think back to it, because it was obviously like a great human experiment. It was like a wild thing to do, to be like, no more kings, and
Right.
you're like, yeah, you know, we want people to be able to be, instead of being serfs for a king, to be independent and to have their own land, and to, you know, be able to speak their speak their mind, and to be able to defend themselves against the crown, and you know, whether that's a king grown on American soil or a king from afar. Like, we believe you should have the ability to say "fuck you, no," and shoot them in the face if they try and tell you that you're their serf. And that was a crazy thing at the time.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, like I think I track what you're saying with like the revolution being having a lot of anarchist tones, and that's why I consider the American Revolution and kind of what it brought the American culture for generations after. It had a lot of anarchist tones in it, and very very individualistic tones that I think the revolutionaries themselves probably would be more in line with our way of thinking, like a lot of them who just wanted to just have peace, do their own thing, build their communities, you know, continue their, you know, Germans and English and all sorts of other coming across to live their own religion freely, to not serve a king and all that kind of thing, and to avoid wars and famines. And then the founding fathers, in their great wisdom, so many of them decided, actually, I'd like to be a king by a different name.
Yeah.
And so many of them took advantage of that power, and some people would be like, oh, blasphemy. Well, so many people don't even know about the Whiskey Rebellion, where
Yep.
George Washington rounded up taxes from his revolutionaries who were, you know, successfully manufacturing or distilling whiskey,
Yeah.
successfully distilling whiskey and making a good profit off of it. And they're like, actually, that war was kind of expensive, and, you know, seeing as we're in charge of you, I guess you owe us that. And all of a sudden, you've got a king by a different name, and from there, I mean, we've got to the point where we went from, I say we, I wish I could have been there. I could have been there shooting at redcoats, but came a little later. You know, so many went from being in charge of themselves to the point now where we have the Patriot Act, where they can wiretap your phone and, you know, like, do a deep dive on everything you get up to in your own personal time without ever having any kind of warrant, and they can like monitor you and kick in your door, and, you know, with the flimsiest of excuses and the laziest of warrants, they can ruin your life and execute you and get away with it. And this is the same country. It sounds wild to say that these things happened in the same country. Like, they shot at the king's men, and now the king's men, by a different name, can break into your house in the middle of the night and kidnap or kill you, and most of the country will turn a blind eye. And That's the thing. When people hear this term anarchism and they think that's scary, it's kind of the inverse for me. Now I've been a proud anarchist for a while, and because I think of it as this incredibly beautiful, peaceful ideal of what could be if we didn't have the guarantee of violence. Because the way that a lot of people might react when they first hear the term anarchy, or when they've heard it from media and kind of all the portrayals of it, where it's Mad Max mayhem all the time. It's like, I view government as Mad Max mayhem all the time, with a lot of window dressing. Like, instead of guys with hockey masks and fetish gear running around, burning things and blowing things up and stealing your stuff, it's people in nice, well-polished uniforms with badges, and they've got the legitimacy because apparently they protect us, but I don't really see a lot of protecting going on.
Yep, that's very well said. And I think like exactly what you were saying of like people, well, without government, it would be chaos. I'm like, well,
It's chaos
what's happening
right
now? Well, and then I assume the retort is like, yeah, but it would be even worse, which funnily enough sounds to me like the COVID vaccines, like, yeah, but if I didn't get it, I'd be way sicker. And like, but that's the thing is like, it's like, oh, well, if we didn't have government, well, how do you know? Because that's been the paradigm for so long. How can you possibly claim with any certainty that without government, it would be so much worse and so much violent? And like, for sure, there's if there were no government today, there would be chaos. But I argue that's not because there's something inherently wrong with anarchy. It's because government has been dominating human civilization and human minds for so long that people don't know how to act without it. But I still don't think that like the average person would be out committing crimes, because the average person still has a moral compass, even if it gets totally exploited and mangled by government propaganda and they can't see that the government is violating their own principles, which is another Larkin Rose sensibility of like, all you have to do is show people that government is incompatible with their existing morals. You don't have to change their morals, because most people don't believe it's okay to kill. They don't believe it's okay to steal. They've just been given this little mind virus of like, well, you get an exception if you're the government because we need to have control and authority. And like people will be like, oh, well, why don't you move to Somalia? Because Somalia, has descended into anarchy. But it's like, well, It doesn't exist in a vacuum. What happened before then? Like what policies created a situation that turned into chaos? And I think that over time, I don't think it's going to be like, well, the government falls and it's anarchy and that's that, because somebody's going to try to fill the power vacuum and there's going to be more authority. But I do think that in the long run, if you look at the long view of history, as you were saying, it was so revolutionary to be like, no, I'm not going to have a king. I'm not just going to like obey what this guy says. Like, as much as I don't think the Constitution is the be all end all, or, that the revolution solved everything, it was a major step away from that mentality. And I think that's just going to keep happening, like this decentralization. And I know that like the push now is for more centralization, but I think as that happens, inevitably, it's just going to become apparent to more people that that's not the answer. And as you were taught, like, what about at your individual level, how do you facilitate more freedom for yourself? Like, forget like talking shit to politicians online, although it is very fun and maybe not necessarily always a trauma response. Like, sometimes it's just fun. We don't have to read into all of it, but like, what's more effective in your community? How can you help people in your community and yourself be less dependent on the state, be less reliant on their shitty services because there's nothing else? Like, these are the things we can do to like actually start moving toward that, in addition to obviously changing people's mentalities and changing the way people think about government. And the last thing I want to say, and then we'll shut up and I'll hand it back to you, is I see a lot of people saying like, well, how come in France or in Europe, like they go so crazy in their protests, and like they're kind of like, they are left-wing protests. They want more government, but like they are willing to fight back way more than in America. Like, and I think, and this is my working theory of what I've been observing for so long, I think the difference is that they had histories that predate their current governments, right? Like, they have existed for so long as quote countries that they aren't dependent on a government, any system of government to have an identity. Whereas in America, the American national identity is so rooted in like essentially government. Like, yes, there was a revolution and it was incredible. And it's awesome. And like, as much as I am so not a nationalist, if I'm watching a show and they're in the revolution and they're killing redcoats, I'm like, fuck yeah, fight, like kill him, like, and I'm like, ah.
Little
But
Yogi Carey is like, fuck those redcoats up!
shoot him in the head.
Fuck the king!
Right? Well, yeah, fuck the king. But like, I think that so much of American identity is tied to like what came after the Constitution. And so their go-to, and I'm not saying like go
tickle
cops. Like, I don't think that's a solution. I think that perpetuates the cycle of violence. That's not what I'm saying or advocating. But there's such this mentality of like, well, but we have a constitution. We can fix this the right way. So like, if you hear cop apologists, a lot of what they'll say is like, well, if you don't like it, don't blame the cops, just vote for somebody else who will change the law, like work within the system, because we have been so conditioned to believe that this is the superior system, that the Constitution and representative government are the peak of human civilization. It's the best thing we could ever come up with. We have to save the republic. We have to save democracy. That like, it really limits our ability to think outside that system in terms of what will actually get us the most freedom. And so people are so quick to disregard the idea of disobedience and breaking away from it, because we've been programmed to believe that we already have freedom and that the government gives us freedom.
Yeah, it's this rabbit hole where people are like, so many people get very starry-eyed, like you were saying, when we bring up the Constitution, because it is something to be proud of. It's a very recent revolution that, like we've said, changed the world. It's fucking cool. And likewise, when I see redcoats getting fucked up, I'm like, yeah, take that, you imperial bastards. Like, fuck off. You know, like, and people always forget there were Brits shooting at those redcoats. There was a lot of people who came from that little island and were like, and we're done with it. And now there's some of your great grandparents. So, you know, go easy on the British. Hey, I get it though. But no, and it is that, I think you're exactly right. It's that conflation of, okay, well, our answer to the king and, you know, what gave us freedom was the American government, the new baby American government. And it was this, you know, it was a lovely idea. It was, you know, a republic for the people, by the people, and it gave them the ability to resist and all of this kind of thing. And it, you know, it empowered the people, at least in kind of, it was intended to, from being set up. And it's like, okay, well, unfortunately, we have to live in the real world. Like, we don't live in that time period, and it's, you know, you're not going to put the genie back in the bowl. This is the U.S. is an empire. I think we've said that before on the show. It should be pretty common knowledge. You know, there are few countries that can even come close. I mean, we thought Russia was our near peer. It looks like China is closer, but all the same, you know, you've got the American Empire and you've got the Chinese Empire. Okay, those are the two biggest kids on the block. The US being an empire, does that sound like a new nation of 13 colonies that was big and brave and told the British Empire, the old world superpower, to get fucked? Like, does that sound like the same thing? Like a little country that fought for freedom and you know, all that was, well, I say most that was right. They did have their slaves, which is confusing, but
well, and China's a republic, right? Isn't it like the people's, or was that North Korea? I think China's technically a republic. Wait, what's the Chinese? I gotta look this up. Regardless, I'm pretty sure they have a constitution. Like, they have a piece of paper. I'm pretty sure. What? Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be definitely wrong.
Constitution of the People's Republic of China, because that's what they call it, People's Republic.
That's it.
Wow.
So, like, cool word. Like, what does it mean? You know?
No, that's a very good point. China, who is working people in God knows what conditions, like child labor and forced labor, to make the device you're listening to this on. And
I shouldn't laugh.
Fuck. Sorry, people. They have a constitution, and likewise, the country that will put you in prison for smoking a plant or for owning the wrong variant of firearm, which might be very similar to a completely legal one, and will lock you up for that also has a constitution. So what the fuck does it mean? What does it mean to live in a free country?
Yeah, it's some words on paper. And you mentioned Lysander Spooner way earlier in our conversation, but I just want to circle back to him because
he's my favorite. I have to slip him in if we're talking anarchy, especially in an American context.
Me too. I highly, highly recommend. Oh my God.
No treason, the Constitution of no authority.
No authority, you got it. Because so in it, he talks about, so he was an abolitionist in the 19th century, but he was like a total abolitionist. Like he opposed slavery, but he also opposed government. And he makes this whole argument. Well, first, okay, just a little background context, because I think he's so cool. So he successfully argued against licensing laws to become a lawyer. Like he argued that, I think it was in Massachusetts. It was some, I think, New England state. And he argued that those laws like were prejudiced against the poor, like people who couldn't afford to go to law school. And he was successful. Like he became a lawyer, which I think was so cool.
I mean, like that is, I'm not sure if that stuff would pass nowadays, but it's the same thing with politicians where, like, you know, Joe Schmo, who's a really fucking good guy and leader of the people, but, you know, doesn't have, you know, a dime to his name. He, in a real republic, like a real by the people for the people republic, Joe Schmo, who's just, you know, the everyman but is a real good leader, should be able to become president. Surely he should. He would be a great representative of the people. But that game is limited to blue bloods and people with, you know, blue blood backing who have, you know, unlimited bank accounts and resources to throw at them. And guess what? We end up being represented by people who are fucking lizards and who have nothing in common with us. But I digress. Go on.
And that's the thing is, like, on the off chance that some regular person does get elected, the system eats them alive and they become the system themselves. But I'm actually really glad you said that. That's a great lead into what I was going to say about Lysander Spooner is his whole argument against the Constitution. And he really made it from like a legal perspective. Like he talks about like the terms of a contract and like the Constitution can't be binding because not everybody consented at the time. Like it was
our social contract.
Right. And it was these people who had a lot of power and a lot of money. And they got together and like, bless them. They were responsible for the revolution. It's not black and white. I don't want to turn them into like demons and devils, but like they did get together in a tiny little group and decide that all these people living out in the country, living on farms, minding their own business, they were going to be subject to the Constitution now. This is it. They didn't ask them for their consent. They just declared that this was the form of government. And so he makes like this really practical legal argument, but then he also says, and this is a very famous quote, I think, or maybe it's just famous to anarchists, but he says, but whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain. It has either authorized such a government as we have had, or it has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. I think I actually got that word for word correct.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
From a legal standpoint, like the way he argues it, and from a practical standpoint, and mind you, he was arguing this over 100 years ago. He was like, oh, fuck this shit, it failed, you know? And then it got so much worse. But just like...
Yeah, and that was prior to the Civil War. He was arguing... He was arguing against kind of like, trying to prevent that conflict from happening, because I think he could kind of see it brewing. It was like, this doesn't need to be some big case of bloodshed. Like this, for one, the initial contract that set us all up for this failure of communication is null and void.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, is like you look at somebody like when you mentioned like, oh, regular people, like Andrew Jackson is about as close as you can get to someone who like he was poor. He was not born into like any kind of landed elite or whatever. And I know that people love him because of the bank thing, and that is pretty cool. Like he did rebel against the bank, but as he amassed power, like he became just as corrupt and overbearing as anybody else. Like you look at the spoil system, he was like, oh, we're going to root out all the nepotism. And then he like appointed his friends, you know, like he appointed, like, you know, or like, and the interesting thing too, is that he was like very much a federalist. Like when I think it was South Carolina, fact check me, but one of the southern states was threatening noncompliance with the tariff of abominations. It was like this really unpopular tariff. And I don't know the details of it. I'm sure it sucked. But Andrew Jackson did not side with the South or states' rights. He was like, absolutely not. You're going to obey. Like, and so like, so like no matter how populist he might have been coming in, like he still there's actually, it's really funny. I was reading a book last year where he would bitch and moan about how corrupt Washington was, and he was correct, and how they squandered people's money, and then he comes in and he like remodels the White House, and in part it was because he had like an inauguration party, and it really like they fucked up the White House. Like all these people came in and trashed it, but like it was just so funny that like he would make such a big stink about like the elites running the country and trampling the small guy, and then he's going to go take their tax money to like fix up his house and make it really nice, his special authority house.
It's what always happens though. You give anyone, like, you centralize power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's a tale as old as time, and it doesn't matter like how small your government is or how good the people are that you put in charge of it. There will always be some element where, and this is fixed with decentralization, because like smaller groups, if you have, because you need leaders. Like that's the thing about anarchism. A lot, not necessarily like authority figure leaders, but to get shit done, you need people in a leadership capacity often. Like if you put everything to a committee, it's death by bureaucracy. That's some silly communist bullshit that will have you running in circles and dying of starvation. Like you need leaders. Leaders are important, but conflating what makes a poor leader is someone that leads only with authority. And that is what we have, what so many of us have been conditioned to think of as leadership is, banging my fist, I'm in charge, I'm the one who can threaten violence or force or, otherwise put you at a major disadvantage. And that is what we've come to think of as leadership, instead of people who actually give a damn, who are effective, who can lead us to success, and who don't rule with an iron fist, but rule with knowledge and lead by example. And instead of having these populist or whoever else, these people who win popularity contests, who have the resources to engage in something as ego-driven as a political campaign, instead of voting for these people, we don't have a system where we need these daddies and mummies to hold our hand and tell us how to live our lives. We decentralize into a much more localized way of doing things, where of course we have leaders who help us get stuff done, who guide us with their experience and their knowledge, but they don't rule with an iron fist. They don't have the threat of force to be like, actually, we're doing it my way. Like, because if it's so bad an order or an instruction that I'm going to say no, then perhaps perhaps it shouldn't be done. Like, what a crazy thought. Maybe we should have unanimous consent as much as we can on doing anything, especially community activities. Like I was talking to Jacob, the organizer of the Childerberg event that we've gone out to, did the live video for, and I've been out to a couple times now, and he was talking about, I think, Quaker communities and how they, it's funny because this is like, a very traditional way of living. Like Quaker communities, they're very old school in kind of how they run, and they get a lot of stuff done in their church with unanimous consent. Like he was telling some story about how their church, they were wanting to spend money on AC, and this one little old woman who'd been going to the church her whole life was like, we don't need AC, we've never needed AC, let's put that money towards something else. And everyone else was like, yeah, we need AC, let's have some AC. And she was like, we don't need it. And so they put the money towards other things. And it's like, you know what? Respect,
Yeah, and like if that's a system that works for you, that's awesome. Like I always say, like when I'm talking to liberals, and granted I have admitted that I'm not great at converting them, so like take this with a grain of salt, but like something I always tell them is like, look, if you want to have a socialist society, go for it. I'm not going to stop you, but don't you dare try to make me participate. Like let's have our competing systems. Let's see what thrives. Like more variety is fantastic. Like let people actually have an opportunity to put their beliefs into practice and find different ways for things to work, because the current system is not working. And like you're talking about unanimous consent, and like we look at the system and it's literally, it's 51-49, sometimes even less. And then people wonder why it's so divisive. Like, oh, it must be Donald Trump. No, it's the way the system is built. It's like this pendulum.
There's always a loser. Like,
right. And there's
it's not
going
a
to be
compromise.
no, there is no compromise. And like they can use their political speak of like, oh, we're all in this together and you got to do your part. But like, no, it's a uniform policy that everyone is expected to comply with. And 49% of the people don't want to. In fact, they probably, well, not everybody votes. Usually it's like nobody. We had an article at Anti-Media called "Nobody Won the Election" because more people didn't vote than did vote for any of these crappy candidates. That. Yeah, it's a great article. I miss it. I miss the Anti-Media. But point being, like, it's just this pendulum. So there's going to be people who lose out 49%, let's say, and they're going to be bitter. They're going to be pissed. I understand that. But then what happens? They're going to go out and vote. And Lysander Spooner talked about this a lot. Like, they're going to go out and vote so they can have the power. And then next time, the 51 turns into the 49 and they're the oppressed ones. And then they get bitter and oppressed and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And even if you think that your side is totally correct, let's say you're a conservative, even if you get your guy in power, and even if he keeps all his promises, which is highly unlikely, even if he implements all his policies, also highly unlikely, what's going to happen? The other side is going to be so angry, they're going to come out and force to vote, and then they're going to take over, and all your progress is going to be, it's done. It's going to be pushed back, rolled back, and then the other policies and programs are going to come in, and then you're going to fight against that. So, like, again, even if you are correct in your ideological statism, like whatever side it may be, it's still not practical. It's still not going to actually get implemented.
Yeah, what kind of civilization is one where every 4 to 8 years, I said this last episode, you're fighting over a buttered up gun so you can point it at the other half of the room and be like, I'm taking the driver's seat. I'm in control for the next 4 to 8 years. We're doing what I want. Fuck you. And also fuck you for what you did when you had the gun the last 4 to 8 years. Like, we're gonna make you pay, we're gonna undo everything. Like, we're spending all these fucking like billions on elections and policies that then get stripped by a different government and just pissing money and resources and people's time and efforts away. And it's like, what could we have done with all of that human effort and money and like talent? Like, so many people wrapped up entire lives dedicated to maintaining this machine and the various awful apparatuses attached to it. It's like, what if we just didn't? and we competed for the most successful way to function as a society, like you said, with people trying their things out in little microcosms, little communities spread all throughout this massive country that was meant to be this grand experiment. Well, if it was meant to be a grand experiment, let's engage in a grand experiment. Let's let people, because I mean, America has like one large kind of blanket culture. Like, everyone's American here. That much is true. And regardless of this government, staying or going, the people who came from all over the world to become this melting pot of a culture, they're all Americans now, whether they like it or not. They can't go back to where they came from. They have their own identity unique to living in this country for, whether it's 20 years, 50 years, 100. Everyone who's here is now an American of some description. So, okay, everyone here is American, but there's so many ways to be an American. Like, surely, if this is the land of opportunity, the land of the free, surely it should not be one blanket system. It should be people doing all sorts of different ways of life, whether it's, like traditional religious communities or more liberal, cosmopolitan types, or rural mountain men people, or, like privatized cities trying out their thing, or communes, or God knows what else, like there's so many ways to be a human being and to live this life. And the fact that we've all been tricked into living under this one ugly banner where we're fighting over a gun it's inhuman. It's so wasteful. It does awful things. Like, while we're fighting over this buttered up gun, we're empowering awful people to drop bombs across the planet on people that we couldn't point to on a map, and to do imperialist shit where they're enriching themselves off of people not too different from us on the other side of the planet. And for what? So we can be angry and think the world's ending, every election season? Like, it's also tiresome, man. We gotta do better, and we can do better.
I love it. Very well said. And I was actually telling you this before we started recording, but I feel like it bears repeating because it makes me laugh and it makes me sad. Like it's all of it. But so I spent a lot of time in Florida and Tennessee, and I'm from California. And when I'm in Florida and Tennessee, these people, like not these people, as I'm about to make a point about collectivism, but there are people they hear I'm from California and I want to move there. And they're like, oh, don't bring your California bullshit over here. And I'm just like, sir, I have no intention of participating in your politics whatsoever. I want nothing to do with it. I am more anti-government than you. Trust me. And then in California, and I already told you this, but I'm going to repeat it. So in California, I tell people I want to move to the South, and they're like, oh, you got to watch out for those people. Those states are crazy. It's like the Handmaid's Tale. And I just like you guys, like this is what the system does to people, is it pushes them into these collective identities where like, oh no, a state voted red, and like some percentage of people have views you disagree with, so everybody there must just be a terrible person. And the same goes for California. Like there are actually a lot of people here who are not Democrats. And it's mostly the coast where people are Democratic, like the liberal cities. If you go to the center of California, it's like being in the middle of the country, honestly. But if you're from Florida and you hate California because they're blue and Gavin Newsom is a tyrant, which he is, but if we are the government, well, those people, they're dangerous liberal commies, and they might as well just break California off into the sea. I don't care how many like anarchists and libertarians and conservatives are there with them. It's California, so they deserve to get sunken into the ocean and die. Like it's just like, it just perpetuates such an anti-individualist mentality where you just like, you're lumping people into these groups and disregarding their humanity because of politics, because of an electoral system that screws everybody over, when you have so much more in common with the average California or the average Floridian than you do with the people in the halls of power.
Yeah, like those other people, like I said earlier, they're Americans.
Yep.
Whether they're from the same part of the country or not, like they're Americans. They're they're trying to live the American dream in their part of the country as best they can. And fuck, there is only one group of people who are making it harder for us, and they're in Washington D.C. and fucking all their many puppeteers all over the place, whether they're corporate or otherwise. We've been successfully divided and conquered to a large degree, and it's time, touching for one last time on trauma, it's time to move past that a little bit and kind of figure out what the future is. Because if it's just, we every 4 to 8 years we think, oh, this election will fix it, this one will fix it, we're going to be another Roman Empire that people talk about, and they're like, yeah, that was once a great thing. And I mean, that there's a lot to unpack with saying that was once a great thing, because every empire has a lot of baggage. But you know what I mean. The original ideals of freedom and what this was meant to be for people, fleeing their home countries looking for a better life. Like that's what this country should be, not a way to empower a small minority of powerful people and turn regular individuals into tax cattle and aim them at each other's throats in perpetuity. I never use that word. It sounds really posh and wankerish, but whatever.
But sometimes it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And I just want to add that like what we're talking about, the dynamic here in America, it applies all around the world. And yeah, like America for sure has a more freedom-oriented mentality, but we have so much more in common with somebody in another country that our, quote, government wants to go to war with, quote, their government. We have so much more in common with the people living there than we do the people in power who are wanting to send, quote, their people off to die in their name for their power and their authority and their profit. And no, we don't have the same cultures, and some of the values are going to be different. But at the end of the day, as human beings, the vast, vast majority of us, which I know we've been talking shit on majorities, but like for the sake of argument, most people in this world, they want to do right by their families. They want to do right by their friends, their communities. They just want to survive and they want to live in peace. And throughout history, the biggest threat to that is always government. And I'm going to end on that.
Beautiful. I mean, like just to quickly, probably needlessly tack onto that. Like, you see a lot of people like shout with glee when they see like Russian conscripts blown up by drones and stuff, and it's like, man, that's someone's son. Like, if you were watching video of a U.S. serviceman like be hit by a missile of some description and blown up, like, why is that any different at the end of the day? Like, sure, they're invaders and stuff, and like just following orders, but that's like, why are we taking glee in someone like a life being lost? It's crazy that buying into the system and putting a flag in your bio can kind of get people to a point where they shed their humanity to the point they're celebrating death like so happily when they're meant to be an empathetic person. But not to go down the rabbit hole on that, but something to think about. Yeah, for those whether they're left, right, confused, or wherever else, kind of when you remove humanity from groups of people. But thank you so much, Carey. Really, really great talking to you, and I'm glad I could bring you on to talk about this subject, because it's something I've been wanting to touch on for a long time. But I needed the right person with me to really get this across in the way that it needs to be put across. Like, there's so many great anarchists in this community and all over the place who I've talked to, but you're one of the ones who comes with the nurturing, empathetic, peaceful mindset. No, seriously, that I think is so important when you're putting across this kind of philosophy and this lifestyle and this way of being, this mentality to people who might not necessarily understand at face value what it is. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just say that if you made it to the end of this podcast and you're like, oh, this bitch is dumb, like, fuck her, I don't like her. The beauty of Anarchy is there's so many different voices. Like, just don't naysay Anarchy altogether if you don't like me. Like, find somebody else who can articulate it and listen to other people talk about it, and maybe that will resonate with you more so than what I'm saying. And that would be incredible. And I'd be so excited. So I am absolutely not the quote authority on Anarchy, nor would I ever want to be. And I know you didn't say that I was, but just if it didn't hit with me, like, just don't give up. See if there's something else or somebody else that does make sense to you. Because that's the beauty of Anarchy and decentralization and all the things. So thank you for having me on. I mentioned I haven't done a podcast in so long, so it was really nice to have a nice in-depth conversation and bounce ideas off of each other.
Yeah, people usually get to hear you in like a little quick fiery snippet, and I love those videos, and a lot of other people do. But it's nice to let you breathe a little bit too over the course of a whole show. And yeah, couldn't have asked for a better person to help me explain this stuff. And quite right, authority on Anarchy sounds so funny to say, but there are so many great people out there. And personally, I don't even care particularly what school of anarchism you get into, whether you're which school of thought. There's many. What is it? The anarchist. What was Michael Malice's book where he collects all the different philosophies? Fuck.
That's not the white pill one, right?
No,
No, I know what you're talking about. I actually have it. I'm like halfway through it. The Anarchist Handbook.
There we go. Yeah,
Sorry,
the Anarchist Handbook.
Say it again, because I just talked over you. I'll shut up and you go.
No, it's good. Yeah, if you're interested in anarchism and want like a general overview, look up the Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice. It collects like a whole bunch of different people's kind of worldview on anarchism, and there's lots of different flavors, and you don't have to love all of them, but they're different kind of perspectives on this whole beautiful philosophy. But anyway, before we go, one last thing, Carey. Usually we say, can you give the listeners some dad advice, but can you give them some motherly advice, perhaps?
Aww. Yes. Okay, so I have a challenge for everyone.
Nice.
I would suggest that you look into, and this is actually not political, I would look into a woman, her name is Tara Brach, Tarabrach. She is an incredible introduction to feeling your feelings and getting to know yourself better and and diving into all the trauma we were talking about. And it's an added bonus because she is definitely not an anarchist. And it's been such an interesting challenge for me to listen to her and take her guidance and like have to sit with my discomfort of her saying like progressive things. I'm just like, Tara, why are you like this? And then also like, but you're also so wise. So it's like you get double benefit from that. You get to practice not reacting to people who disagree with you, but you also get some really good guidance about presence and awareness and consciousness. And then there's another great book. It's called The Self-Compassion Workbook. And it sounds like really, really lame, but it's actually really cool. And it's kind of the opposite of just like indulging your feelings. It's just like learning to be kind to yourself, but also take responsibility for yourself. And again, we already talked about why I think this is so important to achieving a freer world and attaining your own individual freedom. Because yes, we need freedom from these hierarchical, violent, authoritarian structures, but we can have all that. And if we are not free in our spirit, in our emotions, in our heart, like, are we really free? And are we just going to devolve back into statism and violence? I would say yes. So if you are interested in any of that, I would recommend those two books. I believe the author on the second one is Kristen Neff, with a K on Kristen and Neff on her last name. And those have been very instrumental in my life and my internal journey. So cool if you get into it, and cool if you don't.
Hell yeah, we'll put those links in the description along with Carey's socials. I think you're back on Twitter now, right? Or X.
I am. I have a new account actually. It's bigger than the old account I ever had. So, and it's still not huge, but you know.
Hey.
Yeah. I haven't been banned yet.
We're back. We are so back.
Yeah, they verified me. I was like, oh God, if I apply for verification, are they just gonna ban me? And they didn't. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. TikTok is very tenuous. I think I'm on my second account there, and it's not going to last long, but I am on there for now. I'm on Telegram as well, which I think the link to that is in my Instagram bio.
Awesome. Well, yeah, if you guys want to get more into kind of this whole school of thought and anti-statism and all that kind of thing, definitely look up Carey's videos. They are some of the best. And if you're already well versed in this stuff and you're looking to bring new people in and you don't know how, again, Carey's videos I think are stellar for kind of introducing general concepts and getting people in the mentality of what we're talking about in a way that a lot of people might be more receptive to than a wall of text in a book, or like, read this, idiot. So, and we gave people a reading list, Carey. People are going to love that. Yeah. They're always asking for books to read, so hell yeah.
Well, on
get
that
some wrinkles
note,
on your brain.
Yeah, Lysander Spooner, No Treason, Constitution of No Authority, and also Larkin Rose, The Most Dangerous Superstition, and Rose Wilder Lane, Discovery of Freedom. That's like a very, that speaks a lot to American history, and it's a really cool perspective on why freedom is the superior way of life. That's it.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Carey, once again, and thank you everyone for listening. That's what we got. So, okay, bye.
Bye.